And there's also another aspect to this, and that's Coca, which is the most common native API, which we all know APIs are, for the Mac OS X, for Mac OS X development.
Right.
And we're going to be getting into that a little bit later on. We're going to kind of focus on the first two for the majority of this course.
Right.
And then Coca is going to be kind of added onto the end.
Yeah.
When we start building Mac OS X applications and even mobile applications as well.
Also, the reason you're probably here is because maybe you have an iPhone, maybe you saw somebody with an iPad, and you have a Mac, but the most common reason you're probably here is for mobile development.
Yes.
So Objective-C, as you probably assume, is the development language for the iOS. Mobile platform for the iPods, the iPhones, the iPads.
It's still the preferred language, even though you can do other languages. Objective-C is the preferred language.
Yeah.
So this is very dominant in the iOS software development, the mobile development. And like Brian also mentioned, we can build standalone applications in Mac OS as well.
Yeah.
But since this is so popular with mobile development guys, we do want to make sure that we get into some mobile development later on, where you can kind of get the fundamentals of how do you make an iPhone app? How do you make an iPad app?
Right.
I'm sure that's of great interest to you.
Yeah. And the Cocoa API, it kind of changes when you go from the Mac OS X to the iOS.
Right, yeah.
And so
because Coca Touch is kind of a different variant. Right.
So when you make that transition, if you don't have a solid foundation, it can be a little tricky and cumbersome. So we really want to make sure that you've got that NS object and that foundation framework just rock solid.
Absolutely.
So that from that point, you can just launch out and punch into any kind of API and use this, that, and connect the dots, and you're up and moving.
Could not agree with you more.
Our development environment's going to be one of kind of a combinational approach. And generally speaking, you're going to be using Xcode, the Xcode IDE. In this series, we're going to be using Xcode 4. And that's primarily what we're going to be using, but we don't really want to just jump you right into the IDE. We want to, as we always do, we want to start you with a minimalist approach so that you have a solid understanding of what you're getting into. And then we'll move you up into that Xcode IDE. And we're going to make that move pretty quickly, so we won't stay in the minimalist approach for very long, but just enough to kind of get your bearings and get your sense of like how things are running the Mac OS X.
Now, Brian also brought up something. We're going to be attempting to use the Xcode 4.
Right.
Those of you guys that are in the know, for lack of a better term, know that Xcode 3 and before are all free.
Yes.
Xcode 4 is charged.
At this point in time.
Since we are a legitimate business, Brian, we happen to have our development license for Mac OS.
Yes.
So we're going to be pulling in our purchase copy of Xcode 4. And for those of you that are interested in doing mobile development in Mac OS X development, we would strongly encourage you to go ahead and purchase your own development license. Maybe go watch these videos first. Make sure that's something that you actually want to do, because I think, you can still use version 3, right?
Oh, yeah. And for the most part, everything we do in this is going to be backwards compatible with Xcode 3. I mean, so whatever. So no excuses.
Right. So the minimalist approach that we will take as a text editor, we may be using Text Wrangler. We can also probably simplify that a little bit. We're also going to be using GCC, which is installed when we set up the Apple SDK. And like Brian said, the IDE that we're going to be using once we get past the minimalist portion is going to be Xcode.
Yeah, exciting.
Very exciting. So Brian, what the is this?
Text Wrangler.
Well, but what's inside of Text Wrangler?
It's C.
But what is... Yes, it is pretty much C. Now... When you look at a basic Objective-C program, that just prints out "Welcome the Objective-C," it's just C code.
Nice, that's awesome.
Now that's insane.
It is in the membrane.
Yes. So let's take a look at how we can compile this.
Okay.
Right. So as we drop this little baby down, we're going to break this apart into different sections.
Okay.
Brian. What do we got?
So we've got our compiler.
Yes.
Just like we're used to.
Yes.
And then we have our output file, just like we're used to.
Yes.
But then we have our LOBJT, which is basically our parameter to say we want to include our Objective-C library.
Yes.
And then we want to include our foundation framework. And then we set the source code file, which is our .m file.
Not too shabby, right?
No, not at all.
That's pretty simple.
Very familiar with what we're used to.